What if Casey Dutton's past is about to collide with the dangerous world of the U.S. Marshals? Marshals Season 2 could be setting up a crossover that fans have been waiting for. And this time, Beth and Rip may be closer to the story than anyone expected. With Casey already caught in a dangerous game involving Tom, Dolly, and a growing threat around East Camp, the arrival of two familiar Dutton faces could completely change the balance of power. But why would Beth and Rip get involved, and what could possibly bring them into Casey's fight? More importantly, could their involvement expose the real plan behind the attacks? The Season 1 finale left us with more questions than answers, and if Season 2 follows through on these connections, Casey may soon discover that his family is the key to surviving what comes next. The biggest reason this crossover theory feels so interesting is because Casey is not just another Marshal. He is a Dutton, and that history could become extremely important in Season 2. By the end of the first season, Casey had already found himself surrounded by enemies who seemed to know much more about his past than they should. The situation became even more dangerous when Tom continued working behind the scenes, manipulating events and slowly trying to gain Casey's trust. On the surface, Tom may look like someone Casey can depend on. But underneath that relationship, there appears to be a much bigger plan. And this is where Beth and Rip could enter the story. If the Season 2 storyline connects Casey's investigation to the wider Dutton family conflict, Beth and Rip would be two of the most powerful people Casey could turn to. Beth has never been someone who waits patiently when her family is threatened. She attacks problems directly, and she is especially dangerous when she believes someone is trying to take advantage of a Dutton. Rip, meanwhile, has always been the person who handles the situations that other people cannot. Put those two together with Casey, and suddenly the enemies facing him have a much bigger problem. But there is another detail that makes this theory even more interesting. The kidnapping of Carter in the Dutton Ranch storyline could be connected to the same larger pattern. If powerful enemies are targeting members of the Dutton family, Casey may eventually realize that what is happening around him is not an isolated investigation. Someone could be deliberately using the Dutton name to create pressure, force decisions, or gain control over valuable property and resources. That would give Beth and Rip a very strong reason to become involved. Imagine Casey discovering that the people attacking him are connected to a much larger network. At first, he might believe Tom is simply trying to manipulate the situation around East Camp. But as Casey digs deeper, he could discover that Tom's plan reaches far beyond Montana. And if Texas becomes part of the story, the connection becomes even more interesting because Tom and Tate are already heading in that direction. Could Texas be where the real danger begins? Tate's presence is especially important because he is not just a random character caught in the middle. He is Casey's son, which means anyone using Tate as leverage could put enormous pressure on Casey. If Tom successfully convinces Casey that he is protecting Tate, Casey might become even more willing to trust him. That could be exactly what Tom wants. And if Beth and Rip become involved at the same time, Tom's carefully constructed plan could begin falling apart. Beth would probably question everything. She would not simply accept Tom's story because Casey believes it. She would want answers, and she would likely start looking for the weakness in his plan. Rip would be even more direct. If he believed Tate was in danger, he would have very little patience for anyone standing between him and the truth. That creates a fascinating conflict. Casey could be caught between his responsibility as a Marshal and his responsibility as a Dutton. On one side, he has to follow the law and investigate the case properly. On the other, he has a family that could be placed directly in danger. Beth and Rip could push him to stop thinking only like a Marshal and start thinking like a Dutton again. But there is one major problem. If Tom really is as clever as Season 1 made him appear, he may already understand exactly how Casey thinks. Tom's greatest weapon may not be violence. It may be trust. If he can make Casey believe that he is protecting Tate, helping the ranch, and trying to solve the same problems, then Casey may not realize that he is being manipulated until it is too late. And this could explain why an attack on Casey's home would be so important. If Dolly is also taken hostage during that attack, Casey may believe that she is just another victim. But what if that is exactly what Tom wants him to believe? What if the entire situation is designed to make Casey trust the wrong people? That is where Beth could become extremely important. Beth has spent years dealing with people who lie, manipulate, and hide their real intentions. She knows that the most dangerous enemy is often the one standing beside you while pretending to be an ally. If she notices something that Casey misses, she could be the person who finally makes him question Tom. And that could lead to one of the biggest moments of Season 2. Casey finally realizes that the person he trusted may have been controlling the entire game. But Beth and Rip's involvement would not necessarily mean they immediately become full-time characters in Casey's story. A crossover could be much more subtle. They might communicate with Casey, help him understand the Dutton connection, or become involved when the threat reaches their own family. That would allow both stories to remain connected without making one completely take over the other. And honestly, that may be the smartest way to handle the crossover. Because the real excitement is not simply seeing Beth and Rip appear. The real excitement is seeing what happens when their personalities collide with Casey's world. Beth does not trust easily. Rip does not forgive easily. Casey tries to balance his family loyalty with his duty as a marshal. Put all three into the same conflict, and someone is eventually going to make a dangerous choice. And while the Beth and Rip crossover is exciting, there is an even bigger question waiting underneath it all. If the Dutton family is becoming part of Casey's investigation, who is powerful enough to be targeting them in the first place? Because if Tom is only one piece of the puzzle, then Season 2 could be hiding an enemy far more dangerous than anyone expected. The biggest question now is not whether Beth and Rip could cross paths with Casey. The real question is what would force them into the same fight. And if Season 2 wants to make this crossover meaningful, there needs to be a threat big enough to affect all of them. That threat could be connected to the attacks surrounding Casey, the pressure on the ranch, and the people who have already shown that they are willing to use family members as leverage. Casey may believe he is investigating one dangerous operation, but the deeper he goes, the more he could realize that the problem is much bigger. The people behind the attacks may not care about Casey personally. They may care about what Casey represents. He is a marshal, he has a Dutton background, and he has connections to people who have spent years fighting powerful enemies. That makes him valuable, but it also makes him dangerous to anyone trying to control the situation. And this is exactly where Beth could become a problem for the enemy. Beth is not the kind of person who sits back and waits for someone else to protect her family. If she learns that Casey is being targeted, she would probably want to know why. And once Beth starts asking questions, she is not likely to stop until she finds an answer. She could begin connecting details that Casey has overlooked, especially if someone is deliberately hiding the truth behind layers of false information. But Beth would also have another reason to be suspicious. If someone is using Tate, Carter, or another member of the Dutton family to put pressure on Casey, then Beth would immediately understand what is happening. She knows how powerful fear can be when family is involved. She also knows that an enemy does not need to defeat a Dutton directly. Sometimes all they need to do is threaten someone the Dutton loves. That could turn Casey into a much more dangerous opponent. Instead of simply following the investigation, Casey might start taking matters personally. And that is exactly what his enemies could be hoping for. If Tom can push Casey far enough emotionally, Casey could make a mistake. He could stop trusting his own instincts. He could act before he has enough evidence. And once that happens, Tom could use Casey's actions against him. But there is another person who could stop Casey from making that mistake. Rip. Rip's role in a crossover would be completely different from Beth's. Beth would attack the problem through information, pressure, and manipulation. Rip would look at the people causing the problem and ask one simple question: how do we stop them? That difference could create some fascinating tension between Rip and Casey. Casey is a federal marshal. He has rules, procedures, and responsibilities. Rip has never been known for caring much about rules when his family is in danger. So if Rip believes that someone is threatening Tate or another Dutton, he may want to act immediately. Casey, however, could insist that they need evidence. This could create an emotional argument between the two men. Rip might tell Casey that waiting is exactly what the enemy wants. Casey might argue that rushing in could get someone killed. Neither of them would necessarily be wrong. But while they are arguing, the enemy could be preparing the next move. And that next move could involve Tom. Tom may be trying to make Casey believe that the biggest threat is somewhere else. Perhaps he wants Casey looking at the wrong people, while he quietly strengthens his own position. If that is true, Beth could be the first person to recognize the pattern. She could notice that every time Casey gets close to the truth, something happens to distract him. An attack, a kidnapping, a new threat, a false lead, someone suddenly appearing with information that seems too convenient. At some point, Beth could realize that these events are not random. Someone is controlling the timing. And once Beth reaches that conclusion, Tom could have a serious problem. Because Beth is exactly the kind of enemy who can turn a person's own strategy against them. Instead of confronting Tom immediately, she could pretend that she believes the story. She could allow him to think that Casey is still trusting him. Meanwhile, she could work with Rip and Casey to quietly investigate the people connected to him. This would give us a completely different kind of tension. Tom would believe that his plan is working, Casey would appear to be under his influence, Dolly could continue looking innocent, and Beth and Rip could secretly be trying to expose the entire operation. The danger is that Tom might eventually discover what they are doing, and if he does, the situation could become much worse. Because Tom has already shown that he is willing to use violence. He has connections, resources, and information. If he realizes that Beth and Rip are helping Casey, he could decide that the easiest way to stop them is not to attack Casey directly. He could target the people they love. That would make the crossover much more personal. It could also explain why the Dutton family connection matters so much. The enemy does not simply want money. They may want control. Control over land, control over businesses, control over people. And the Dutton family has spent generations protecting what belongs to them. That means Beth and Rip would never simply walk away. But there is another mystery that could make this story even more complicated. Andrea. Her decision to remain in Montana could become one of the most important developments of Season 2. If she was truly planning to leave, why did she stay? There has to be a reason. And if she has already developed a strong connection with Casey, she could become the person who notices that something is wrong before anyone else. Andrea may not have the same connection to the Dutton family that Beth and Rip have, but she understands Casey's work. She knows how he thinks. She knows what he looks like when something is bothering him. That could make her extremely valuable. And if Andrea starts investigating Tom independently, she could discover something that changes everything. Maybe she finds evidence that connects Tom to the attacks. Maybe she discovers that Dolly is hiding something, or maybe she learns that the entire operation goes much deeper than anyone imagined. The most dangerous possibility is that Andrea could discover the truth and then become a target herself. If that happens, Casey would have another reason to question everything. He could suddenly find himself surrounded by people he does not know whether to trust. Tom claims to be protecting him. Dolly may be hiding something. Andrea is investigating behind the scenes. Beth and Rip are trying to protect the family. And somewhere in the middle of all this, Casey has to figure out who is telling the truth. That is why Season 2 could become much more intense than Season 1. The story is no longer simply about catching criminals. It is about trust. Who can Casey trust? Who is manipulating him? Who is actually protecting Tate? And most importantly, how far will Beth and Rip go when the danger finally reaches their family? Because if Beth realizes that someone has been playing with the Duttons, she is not going to simply expose them. She is going to make them regret it. And if Rip is standing beside her, the enemy may soon realize that attacking Casey was the biggest mistake they could have made. But now we come to the biggest question. What would Beth and Rip actually do if they entered Casey's story? Because this cannot simply be a surprise appearance. If the crossover happens, it needs to change the direction of the story. And I think that is exactly what could happen. Casey may eventually discover that Tom's plan is much bigger than he thought. The attacks, the kidnappings, and the pressure surrounding the ranch could all be connected. And once Casey realizes that his Dutton name is part of the reason he has become a target, he may finally understand that he cannot handle this alone. That is when Beth and Rip could step in. Beth could help Casey see the truth behind Tom's manipulation, while Rip could help protect the people Tom is trying to use against him. But there is a chance their involvement could create an even bigger problem. If Tom discovers that Beth and Rip are helping Casey, he may decide to strike before they can expose him. And this could lead to the confrontation fans have been waiting for. Casey could finally confront Tom and demand the truth. Tom might deny everything, forcing Casey to choose between what he has been told and what the evidence is showing him. At the same time, Beth could uncover the missing piece that proves Tom has been playing everyone. But what about Dolly? That may be the biggest surprise of all. If Dolly really is working with Tom, then Casey has been trusting someone who was secretly helping his enemy. But if Dolly is actually innocent, then Tom may have used her without her knowledge. Either possibility could completely change Casey's relationship with both of them. And there is still the question of Tate. If Tom has taken Tate to Texas, Casey will do anything to bring his son home safely. Beth and Rip would understand that better than anyone. This could be the moment when the Dutton connection becomes more than just a reference. It could become the reason the entire family gets involved. However, I don't think Season 2 will give us all the answers immediately. The writers could stretch this mystery across several episodes, slowly revealing who Tom is really working with and why Casey has become so important to the plan. Every answer could create another question, and that would keep the tension high throughout the season. There is also the possibility that Thomas becomes one of the biggest emotional casualties of this story. If Tom is determined to remove everyone standing in his way, Thomas could find himself in serious danger. His death would not only affect Casey, but it could push Casey into a much darker place. And that could be the turning point. Casey has always tried to balance being a Marshal with being a Dutton. But if someone takes away another person he loves, he may stop trying to keep those two sides separate. He may finally become the Dutton that his enemies were afraid of. That is why the Beth and Rip crossover could be so important. It would not just give fans two familiar characters. It could connect Casey's current battle to the larger Dutton world and show us what happens when the family finally comes together against a common enemy. So, will Beth and Rip really cross paths with Casey in Season 2? Right now, that remains a theory. But the connections are certainly interesting, and if the writers decide to bring these stories together, we could be looking at one of the biggest moments in the entire series. The real mystery is not whether Casey can defeat Tom, it is whether Casey will discover the truth before Tom's plan destroys everything around him. And if Beth and Rip really are coming, Tom may have no idea what kind of fight he has just started. So, now I want to hear from you. Do you think Beth and Rip should appear in Marshals Season 2? Could they help Casey expose Tom, or would their involvement make the situation even more dangerous? And who do you think Casey should trust? Andrea, Dolly, or nobody at all? Let me know your theory in the comments, because if this crossover really happens, Season 2 could change the entire Dutton universe. The biggest question now is whether Beth and Rip will really step into Casey's dangerous world. If they do, this could become much more than a simple crossover. It could connect Casey's investigation to a much larger Dutton story and completely change the direction of Season 2. But remember, the biggest danger may still be Tom. If he has been manipulating Casey from the beginning, then every move Casey makes could already be part of Tom's plan. And if Beth discovers the truth before Casey does, we could finally see the Duttons turn the tables. So what do you think? Will Beth and Rip actually cross paths with Casey? Could Beth be the one who exposes Tom and Dolly? And can Casey protect Tate before it's too late? Share your theory in the comments, because Season 2 could be about to deliver one of the most unexpected Dutton connections yet. And if you enjoyed this theory, make sure you stay tuned for more Marshals Season 2 updates, theories, and major story developments. The next chapter could change everything.